Welcome to the Sixth Ward Garden Park. We're here today with Ryan Schrockert to do a demonstration on composting. And the Sixth Ward Garden Park is really a different kind of public park. It's the first of its kind in Montana, where it was designed based on permaculture principles. And one of those principles that we want to emphasize today is working with nature and working with microbes to break down garden waste, food waste, and turn it into usable compost.
Today we're going to have a composting demonstration, and first we're going to start off just going through some of the different components that we'll be using in what's called the lasagna style or lasagna method of composting. First we have some kindly donated egg cartons. It is important that if you're using cardboard, try not to have anything that's dyed or stained, so the egg cartons work really well. After we layer those, we are going to add some leafy material. So if you ever have any opportunity to bag up leaves at home, you can also have grass clippings added at that stage as well. We've got a nice little pile of horse manure that'll also be going on top of that layer. And then there are some freshly broken down food scraps. This is some coffee grounds, eggshells, a variety of different organic material from the kitchen. And behind it we have a little pile that's been working since last fall, so we're going to add that in as well. And the big key ingredient to give compost its temperature that you have to get to is a nice big old batch of chicken manure. So if you have access to that, this is where you're going to get a lot of the heat that'll generate in the compost itself. And finally, once we add these layers in, we'll top it off with some working compost from last year. Now we're just kind of getting everything wet. Hopefully the goal is that we'll get a lot of microbial and bug activities. There's already a lot of nice worms in this existing pile of compost. But by getting the cardboard wet, it'll help bring them a little bit down and help break that cardboard down. A little bit of working food scraps from last season. We'll add in some fresh as well. And again, if you've got a 5-gallon bucket, you get them every year from Ace. Simple little lid. Just throw your food scraps in there. Coffee's good. Any kind of organic waste. Make sure there's no meats, no oils, no bones. You don't want to have those things breaking down in the compost. We don't get a ton of rain in Helena. As much water as you can add to your compost, it'll just help everything continually break down. If we're lucky enough to get a nice, heavy rainy day, you probably don't need to water the compost, but you should be watering a pile this big about once a week. And eventually, when this turns into a working pile, the goal is to get the temperature up to about 140 degrees, which will kill off a lot of the weeds, make everything break down, and really activate a lot of the anaerobic activity that needs to happen in there to turn what we're adding into this pile into usable compost for next year. Darby, remind me, are you from? Here's an example of what looks to be a leftover Brussels sprout or red cabbage stalk. This is something that just doesn't break down very well, so it is best if you can, it's a little bit fibrous now, to break those in smaller pieces if you're adding them to your compost. Otherwise, don't feel bad about getting rid of the stalk. The cabbage leaves, the top part of those plants break down pretty well, but the thickness of that stalk just doesn't break down over time with compost that we have here in Montana. Next, we're going to add the hot workings. So this is about 30 gallons of chicken scraps. It's both the bedding and the manure. And the goal is that this will help us get the temperature of this pile of compost up to about 140 degrees, hopefully here in the next couple weeks. We've got a temperature probe usually find these for $8 to $10. You definitely want something that goes up to 200 degrees. Your compost should not be above 180. If it's getting that hot, the only way to really slow it down is to pull things out of the pile. But you want it right around 140, even 160 is okay. And again, the goal there is that'll help break down the organic material into usable soil for next year. And the big reveal for the chicken manure, we're not having too many folks get too close, so just gonna drape this over the top. Fortunate enough to have access to chicken manure, you can use goat manure and a couple other different types, but you want to try and get something that is still fresh and hasn't been sitting for the whole season. And then adding some water, I'll spread that out a little bit, but we'll just try and get that nice and wet, tamped down a little bit. A little bit of cardboard, some leaves. We've got our organic food waste. We added the chicken manure, and the last part of this first layer in the lasagna method is going to be some of the horse manure. It is really important when you're sourcing anything that you're putting in your compost that's not food scraps, that you're careful with any long-term herbicide. And there's a couple different ways that you can test that. One of them is mixing some soil with the horse manure and planting a bean. And that bean should come up in about 7 to 10 days. And you're going to look for any irregularities. So you're looking at the leaves for any browning or curling, any holes that might develop. We did try to test this soil, and unfortunately there's just too much water that got in one of the buckets. So I had a little bit of sprout. I didn't see too much irregularity on one of the 3 that I planted. But we do know the source for where this horse manure comes from. So the main takeaway is just know where you're getting your manure from. And if you can, avoid places that have used any herbicide, both on the feed or on the farm. You want to push that other one in there, Les?
I will.
Yeah, the running start. There you go.
No, I wouldn't want to get stuck.
Have you throw some more water on. So there is a lot of water involved in making a compost pile. We're not fortunate enough to live in some zones in the country where it rains more, but again, don't skimp in the beginnings of your pile. You really want to get as much moisture in there to really help things break down over time. And it'll make it a lot easier when you're turning your compost every couple of weeks or at least once a week throughout the summer. For the purposes today, we're just going to be layering, and we probably won't turn this compost for at least a few weeks, but we will continually add water at least every few days or once a week, whether in bucket form or just using the hose. Next step, we're going to add our working compost. Again, following the lasagna method, we'll be going on top of the horse manure, the chicken waste, the food scraps, and the cardboard underneath. And once we add this layer on top, we're going to do one more layer of those 5 components again, watering in between each layer as we go.
How deep?
We just get about half of this on there. You can see here we've got a little redworm activity. We've got a little redworm there, another one dangling there. Those are the more native types of worms we have in Montana, not as many of the night crawlers that are more common elsewhere. And you're looking for as many of those worms as you can find. That's a good sign of healthy soil. Now second layering, again, base of cardboard. We'll do some leaves. We'll add the last of the working food scraps from last year. 2 more wheelbarrows of horse manure, and then we'll dress it with this last little pile. And fingers crossed, 2 weeks from now, we're getting about 80, maybe 100 degrees in there. We could use a little water on top of these just to kind of help settle them down, and they'll keep breaking down. I don't mind if I get a little wet. Now we're going to go into the leaf pile. Anybody wants to come in and grab some leaves, they're more than welcome to. Keep the water going. Again, if you have any grass clippings, this is a good time to put those in as well.
This is our carbon, right?
This is our carbon. Nitrogen, variety of different organic materials that just help build a good soil structure.
What about banana peels?
You know, any kind of fruits I'm mostly okay with, but you do have to be careful with citrus. So right now we're adding one more layer of the working food scraps from last summer. And then after this, we're going to dress it with 2 more wheelbarrows of manure, and then the last layer of working compost that we pulled out today. All right!
Yahoo!
Lovely. Go, Jesse.
So we're just adding some of our last piles of horse manure.
That would be a lie.
Now the rake man comes.
Here we go. Oh, yeah.
One thing with building a pile this big, you always got to be somewhat careful as you get stacked up too high in the back. So I'm going to try and bring a little bit of it forward. And then when we finally dress it with last year's working compost, we'll build it out a little bit in the front. Trying to keep it as level as possible so you don't have a lot of the water just going right down the back. As it rains or as you're spreading that water on, you're just covering all the surfaces the best you can. Over time, if you ever wanted to add working compost, the best thing to do is pull a big section of this out, fill it in there, and then put that section you pulled out back on top. At your home compost piles, you can kind of work them left to right. Ideally, you'd have a 3-pile system. So an initial pile that kind of breaks down over time, a working pile that you're always adding some of that initial pile to, and then a finished pile that people can pull from. I generally like to add my compost at the previous year and then just top dress it at the beginning of the year. So as you're planting, you can just take handfuls of finished compost, kind of put them in the hole when you're planting a pepper or you're planting a tomato, and then just pile a little bit up around the base, and then all those nutrients will soak right into that plant. So after several layers of adding our cardboard, our organic materials, including leaves, chicken waste, food scraps, and some working compost from last year, this is the 6th Ward Edible Food Forest and Helena Community Gardens compost pile. We're hopeful that by next season we'll have some separation so that you can actually separate by working, active, and finished. And we'll have hopefully a follow-up video to help explain what that is. It's been a pleasure out here on a lovely Saturday morning, and we hope you guys all take care, stay safe, and keep digging.